All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am Brooke Rouse, the Executive Director of the St. Lawrence County Chamber and the co-chair of the St. Lawrence Leadership Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have such a great turnout for this new mini series. Just a couple of points here. This is being recorded, so it will be available to share. And for those who are new to Zoom, probably by this point you've all had the opportunity to be online, but if not, I wish I were were you. Good for you. But if you toggle to the top right of the screen, you can kind of choose how you want to be viewing things. So you can choose speaker view, and then Peter's going to be sharing his screen. And when he does that, you're going to want to make sure that that's full screen for you to view the details. So just a couple of things there. And certainly if you have any questions or thoughts as we go along, we do hope this will be interactive. Use that chat box below, and Peter's got some interesting ways to engage you as well. So we look forward to that. So I wanted to make sure to introduce the St. Lawrence Leadership Institute. We have some of our alumni and panelists with us today attending this session. But the St. Lawrence Leadership Institute is a professional development program. We have it actually now for credit and non-credit, offered in partnership with the colleges in the area and the St. Lawrence County Chamber. Its mission is to foster the development of emerging and existing leaders for the advancement of St. Lawrence County and its communities. The Leadership Institute cultivates individuals willing and capable of being inspiring leaders by offering issues education, leadership skill development, and networking opportunities. Typically, our program is a monthly program that runs throughout the year. We had to go virtual in the spring, and we made the decision not to run the program this year with all that's going on. Really, a key part of the program is being physically in different locations for each class session and really getting to know the communities and the organizations and agencies throughout the county that are doing such important work. So in place of that, we're excited to offer some other kind of mini sessions, this being our first one, and really excited today to offer this session, which is the first in a series of 3 that we hope you will join us for the others the next 2 Thursdays. And we're very excited to be partnering with Peter Anderson from Citadel Consulting. So thank you so much, Peter, for being with us today and offering this opportunity. Citadel Consulting provides culture and leadership development training through emotional intelligence and mindfulness strategies. If you're dealing with change management, succession, and talent in your leadership team, or working hard on inclusion, diversity, and empathy in the disrupted workplace, Peter's team can help you unravel the complexity of the issues that brought you to us in this session or to him and his firm, and provide focused, actionable interventions and solutions. So we're really looking forward. I think more than ever this is relevant, but Peter would certainly say that it's always relevant. And so we thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Brooke. Yeah, I'm always caught lately in the really awkward place of having something that can really make a difference for people and wishing that I didn't have to offer it to people. But here we are. And so I'm hopeful that you will get something useful out of our time today. As Brooke said, this is the first in a 3-part series. Each part of the series is separate in the sense that you could drop in, drop out, but they do build on each other. So I'm hopeful that you'll be able to meet with us for the next 2 weeks after today and see if we can move things along in a different way through the three different sessions. So I've got a bunch of things to do with you today, and I'm hoping to make some of this interactive if the technology works. And it worked yesterday, so let's hope it works today. But I am going to ask you to do something a little bit strange, and that is I'm going to actually ask you to get out your cell phone and put it beside you. You can put it face down if you don't mind, but we will be doing some polling, and you can do that through your cell phone if you like. You can also do it through the computer. So I'll put the link in the chat when the time comes. It would also be great if you had a chance to grab a pen and a piece of paper or something to write on. That's not super important, but if it's close to hand, grab it right now. The other thing I'll say is that I would love you to write down the questions as they occur to you while I'm speaking, and then maybe we can have time at the end to share some of those. But even if we run out of time, please be sure to put them in the chat or to send them to Brooke or to me directly. It's my goal to respond to every single question. Hopefully we'll be able to do that all together at some, for some of them. But if we can't, I do want to follow up directly with you. So our plan for today is to discuss why emotions matter. And I've got some content that's going to sort of be content rich for the first 10, 12 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience of emotions and the field of emotional intelligence in general. But more important, I've designed a couple of ways to engage with you directly, and we'll have a chance to see what the group is thinking and feeling right now today. At the end, we're going to practice a couple of strategies that I hope you can take away with you. So as always, I'm super happy to answer questions. We do have some stuff to go through at the beginning, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions later. So what I'm going to do is share screen with you. This shouldn't erase your ability to see the chat and to put questions there. So why do emotions matter? Well, emotions matter mostly because they're connected to your brain and you take your brain with you wherever you go. The problem with emotional intelligence, and I find this when I'm talking to clients for the first time, even people that I've been coaching for a while, is that emotional intelligence as an idea is pretty simple on the front of it, and then it gets very complex. So it's simple in the sense that it engages with things that we often learn in primary school, like that how you behave towards others, the ways in which you interact with each other, the way you feel about the things that are going on, the way people encourage you and support you has a huge difference on what you do. The complexity comes out of the way in which that happens, both in the brain, but then also for each individual person. We're different neurologically. We have neurodiversity. We're different in our experiences. We're different in the ways we experience interactions. All of those things make it a very complex system for us as individuals. And then for organizations, which also have an emotional culture and emotions in a sense, it gets even more complex because organizations are just combinations of people. And so once we dig into emotional intelligence, what we find is the simple truth is always there, right? It matters how we show up for work, and it matters to other people as well as to us. The complexity comes into the fact that emotional intelligence actually involves a set of competencies and skills that we can develop. And these skills and competencies help us perceive, understand, and manage emotions in ourselves and in other people. And that in combination, all of these things help us make more intelligent responses, more informed responses. They create better interactions around decision making. They create workplaces that are more inclusive, more collaborative, more creative, more efficient, and more productive. So the simple part is that emotions influence all our decisions, both in a productive way and in an unproductive way. And they influence all our behaviors and performance. So when we look at emotional intelligence, I love the graphic you can see there on the right of the tree, right? And we'll see this graphic again when I talk about something called emotional culture. But the tree, right, that we see is leaves, branches, trunk, right? We can appreciate it. What we don't see is the root system that feeds that tree. And when we talk in terms of a person, right, that root system is the unconscious or subconscious emotional responses that we're not aware of. Whereas the top of the tree is what we notice going on. For a culture, that top part of the tree is its vision and values, right? That the way it presents itself to the world and the way it presents itself to employees. whereas the root system is really the lived emotional culture. And as we'll see, companies that can align the roots with the trunk far outperform their competitors because they're paying attention to the whole organism in a sense. So what I do in my company is I help people basically notice the impact of emotions and emotional culture. I help them engage with the reality of that and then empower them towards some solutions. So the reason why we have to deal with emotions in the workplace, right? So our basic why, as I said, is that they're unavoidable because they happen in the brain and you need your brain for work. The great part of that is that they're also trainable, right? Our brains are incredible little machines. They're very lazy. They like to automate all sorts of processes. They like to do things without really thinking about it, but they are really trainable. And so what we know from positive psychology framework is that these so-called positive emotions tend to broaden and build. They increase our productivity, creativity, they improve relationships. And over time, spending more time in positive states tends to build our resilience, tends to increase our flexibility and our efficiency. The same way, negative emotions tend to close us down. They limit and constrain. And they produce those opposite kinds of effects and reactive events. So we talk about this sometimes as the fight-flight syndrome, but there's also a third one, which is freeze. Right? And so these behaviors tend not to be productive and don't engage with our judgment centers. So they're all part of a system that is important and necessary, but that is hard to manage in the workplace. So the graphic on the left sort of presents a little bit of the framework. We'll dig into it in a second. But the basic idea is that when we have an interaction or there is an event, right, we are perceiving that through our brain, right, both through our emotional brain and through our thinking brain. And in the interplay between those, somehow we're arriving at a set of decisions and behaviors. So what emotional intelligence asks us to do is to think about what's happening in the middle of that sequence. And so when we have an event, right, we tend to move into a neurological response. So we're not really thinking about what's going on inside of us, but what's happening is neurological, cognitive, and even physical, right? And it's distinctly personal for each of us. When that event happens, the emotional brain, sometimes called the limbic system or the old brain or the reptilian brain or the base brain, the base of the spine, that emotional brain is our first interaction with what we perceive. And that emotional brain is the one that was basically designed to keep us alive. And you've probably heard things like this before, that what that part of the brain does is it assesses whether something is useful or not useful, whether it's going to present a reward or going to present a threat. And for those of you who've done any reading or experience into this, what these are things like the amygdala and the hippocampus. So the amygdala, where all the stress hormones come out of, that's fundamentally tied up with emotions in all sorts of ways. So we have this immediate response, and then things get shunted into our thinking brain. And between our emotional brain and our thinking brain, we're going through all sorts of amazing cognitive processes. We're attaching to memories, we're trying to assess, right? We're trying to remember. And out of all of that thinking, right, we're driving our decisions and our behaviors. In really bad situations, right, we're not engaging the thinking brain, right? In really good situations, we're not engaging the thinking brain, right? So imagine smelling warm chocolate chip cookies. It's like that sense of smell is connected straight to the emotional brain. It doesn't go anywhere else, where the other senses tend to go through the thinking brain, right? We smell those cookies and we go, oh, right? I love that smell. That reminds me of this, reminds me of that, reminds me of cooking, baking, whatever. And we want a cookie, right? Same thing happens with threat, right? We come into a threat situation. For me, it's breaking glass because I had a bad bicycle accident when I was a kid. So I hear breaking glass, it's like visceral reaction all the way through me, right? And that I have not much control over in the moment it happens. But then I can engage my thinking brain, think about what's going on, make a judgment that assesses that threat or reward in a different way. So these things are all important in the workplace because we can't turn it off, right? So some people I've talked to over the past couple of years have said, well, emotions don't have any place in our workplace, right? We're very careful, we're very deliberate, we're very rational about our decisions. And so I just kind of look at them for a little while, and then we talk about how you're not a machine, right? The great thing about human beings is that they can engage emotions in their interactions with each other. So as we'll see, one of the curious phenomena that's happening with the increase in AI is that artificial intelligence and algorithms is the need for emotional intelligence is actually rising up because we have to compensate for the AI. So when all of these things are happening, what we're engaging as thinking machines and feeling machines is a set of habits in a sense. So there's a trigger, right? That trigger imposes a reaction on us. We react, and there's a reward. There's something that happens as a consequence of that reaction. And that feedback loop generates new neural pathways in us. And so this is where emotion is part of our physical makeup as well. And so the more we experience a trigger and a certain reaction for a certain reward, the stronger that habit is as it gets sort of cemented into place in our neural pathways. The exciting thing is that our neural pathways are malleable, they're changeable. We can always shift them. The bad part of that is that it's really easy to fall into certain kinds of habits. So you may know someone who has anger issues, right? What's going on there is that they're more or less permanently in a triggered state into a reaction that leads to something they're going to call anger. And the behaviors that are associated with that kind of reaction tend to fall in a certain kind of unproductive category, right? What we want to try to do through emotional intelligence development is to build a new set of habit formation loops, right? And we'll do this a little bit later as an exercise, but essentially what we want to do with the trigger is respond to it, not react to it. And this will be the topic of our third part of the series. When we have a trigger, like that cookie or like something that really irritates us, right, we're going to have a response. And our response is going to be to associate that feeling with memories that we have, to evaluate the feeling to see if it's, an accurate label, right? And to reflect on that feeling and the kinds of actions we can take. And then as a response, we can choose those actions. Now, the difficult thing is that the action we take might be the same as the reaction that we would have from the trigger before. But by going through the process of evaluation, right? So this emotional reasoning, we're arriving at maybe the same decision, maybe a different one, but in a totally different way. And what we're doing is building new habits around dealing with our emotions in the workplace. And so one of the ways I love to approach this with people when I'm coaching or when I'm running workshops is to think about this as claiming yourself for yourself, right? Very often when we have these triggers and reactions, what we're doing, right, is releasing the power, right, into our subconscious, right? And for some things, that's really good. Like if someone's, something's coming at my eye, I want that subconscious quick reaction. But when I'm interacting with colleagues in the workplace, more often I don't. And so by creating these new habit formation loops, we're reclaiming ourselves into a new sense of responsibility and agency. So I put up a link there. I'm going to drop that also in the chat. And what I want you to do, it's going to take you to a site. Let me just activate that site, and I will post. Well, my chat box is gone. That's interesting. I will figure out how to share it in the chat, but you can do this through your phone, or you can just type in the link and it will take you to a Poll Everywhere site. And what I'd like you to do is type in 2 or 3 emotions that you have felt over the last 24 hours at work. So 2 or 3 emotions that you felt over the last 24 hours at work. There's the chat. There, you should be able to see that in the chat now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to share into the other screen that will show you results. So again, just 2 or 3 emotions that you felt. The screen will populate as we go along.
Peter, I'm trying this through my phone because this is something new for me. And it said that the password could not be found. I just want to make sure does it have to be capitalized and the numbers towards the letters and numbers,
Yeah, it's
zeros and O's? I'm thinking maybe that.
it's 011 at the end. So it's Peter Anderso and then 011. And if that's not working for you on your phone, I apologize. You should be able to direct your phone browser to the same URL.
Yep, that worked.
Okay.
I kept the N in there. That was my issue.
Oh, yeah. So just for interest's sake, I'll say that I did this yesterday with a group of colleagues around North America, and I'll show you what theirs was. It's not particularly different from yours today, sadly. One of the things that this is doing is that when more than one person types the word increases in size. So this is a pretty standard word cloud. I'll maybe do this for another minute or two. So there's haha, that's great. So, I always get a little bit worried with these because sometimes, well, there's no filter. So people can type whatever they want. This is not an invitation. But we can see some interesting examples: anger, frustration, but also appreciation, right? Loneliness, happiness, anxiety, fulfillment. These are all sort of like a daily experience of work, right? If you were to think about each of those words over the last 6 months, I bet you'd experienced at least one of them every day, right? And so part of what we do with our emotional intelligence development and our awareness of emotional intelligence is that we try to pay attention to what is going on. So I'm going to move us back to the main presentation. Let's take a peek at how you're feeling today, all of you. Great. So we'll actually have a chance to go back to that poll a little bit later for a different exercise. So if it's on your browser, just leave it up there. I'll move you to a different activity in a second. So here is here's the screenshot from yesterday from my colleagues, right? It's pretty amazing to me that a lot of the same words are there in the same degree. It's not amazing to me that a lot of the same words are there, right? People are people. The kinds of experiences and emotions we feel and show at work are essentially the same. We just have a personal way, right, an individual way in which we deal with those and in which our colleagues experience us and we experience our colleagues. So the thing about emotions and emotional intelligence is that it's been rising into prominence over the last 10 years. It's really been around since the early 90s as a concept. It's been around even longer than that as sort of an idea for how to manage yourself. But there's a really interesting study that was published right at the end of last year, in December last year, and it was built out of data that was collected over 2019. And what this study showed, run by the Capgemini Institute, specifically on emotional intelligence, is that emotional intelligence is one of the top predicted needs in the US, well, actually the global workforce. What's interesting to me, and maybe to you also, is this is pre-pandemic. So a lot of the figures that we're seeing have probably been accelerated as a result of the situation we find ourselves in now. But in 2019, you can see some of the measures down the left-hand side. Some of the ones that I thought were particularly interesting, actually, one of the ones that's most interesting is the last one. So millennials actually believe that the skills that they have, right, that they've achieved through university and through training will be made redundant in the next 1 to 3 years, right? So almost 50% of millennials believe this. If you think around your organization and who are the millennials in your organization, this ought to really worry you, right? What's happening here, though, is that emotional intelligence, right, the ability to interact with people, the ability to understand, perceive, and manage emotions in ourselves and in other people is becoming important because it's one of the things that machines can't do. And so companies that have been using emotional intelligence strategies in the workplace have been surveyed through this report, and they're showing huge gains. So companies on the right-hand side, you can see there's a direct impact on employees' well-being, right? Their emotional well-being, reduced fear of job loss, and especially their openness to change. If there's anything that's happened over the last 6 months, it's that we've all been made aware of how important it is to be flexible around change. But the organizations themselves reap the benefits as well. So it's not just the employees, but organizations, productivity, efficiency, higher employee satisfaction, increase in market share. These are not insignificant numbers. And so why emotions in the workplace? Well, because having highly emotionally intelligent employees is hugely important for competitiveness, well-being, productivity, efficiency, everything. And so if you look across that board, right, and you think about your own organization, where do you want to see a change, right? You can see that change and maybe move that change in the direction you want to see it go through emotional intelligence development. One of the things that I've found pretty significant in the North Country and the people that I've talked to actually has to do with attrition. So it's keeping people here, right? Keeping people in these positions, talented people who can do their job and enjoy their work and be part of the community. We have experienced a huge workplace disruption, right? We'll have a chance to explore that in a little bit, but that disrupted workplace is something that people have been predicting for a long time. It's accelerated with the pandemic, and it's had disastrous economic effects. But the idea that we might be a distributed workforce is not a new one, right? And so what people are finding is that emotions and being able to manage and regulate and understand emotions in the new workplace is incredibly important. And the organizational research is showing this to be true. And I've got a ton of these kinds of facts and figures if you want to see them. But for example, teams that have high emotional team intelligence have far less conflict, and they resolve any conflict they have much faster. They stay on task, they're more innovative. One that I thought might be interesting for some of the people who might be in industry is this case study at a company called Cargotec. They're a global shipping company. And what they found for the rolling 12 months before and after emotional intelligence development training with their non-supervisory staff was that there was some pretty significant changes. And so if you just take a look at that, it's kind of curious. Obviously, unsafe conditions have gone down, unsafe acts have stayed basically the same. Near misses have doubled, right? But the really significant thing, I think, for a lot of companies in terms of the bottom line is the lost time for injuries went from 7 to 1. So again, the kinds of effects that we can have just by paying attention to what's going on with how we're feeling, the ways in which we're perceiving other people is pretty significant. So that's more or less the why, right? It's in our brains. We take our brains with us to work. Hopefully. The other why is that it's good for our organizations. The return on investment, the kinds of factors that we can drive are really significant and becoming more and more significant as we move through into basically a new economy. So I wanted to take a pause there and just take a breath and see if there are any really quick questions that come up in the chat box around the content. And then what I want to transition to is to actually run you through maybe a 5-minute survey. You've probably been surveyed up and down all over, but I think you'll find this pretty interesting. So we'll just pause for a second and see if there's anything that comes up in the chat box. Okay, so seeing nothing, I'm gonna move on. So the company that I work with, called Genos International, it's an emotional intelligence assessment company. And one of the assessments that I use with organizations is something called the Emotional Culture Index Survey. And so you probably remember the tree from earlier. The emotional culture of a company is that sort of hidden day-to-day acted upon culture. The cognitive culture is the ideal culture. It's the culture that's presented to the world. The Emotional Culture Index Survey helps us sort of talk to our employees about emotions. One of the problems with emotions is they're really hard to measure, right? So unlike IQ tests or DISC assessments or all the other things that HR people love to run candidates and their companies through, the measures that you get out of emotional intelligence assessments can vary, right? So your IQ is your IQ. It's the same. The only way it's going to change is decline as you get older. But emotional intelligence actually tends to increase as you get older and you get more experienced. And so the Emotional Culture Index Survey is a great way to interact with people in your organization to start talking about emotions in the workplace. And so in a normal survey, what we'd use the survey for is to assess current emotions, what people are feeling over the last little while, their expected emotions, how often they think it's fair and reasonable to experience certain emotions at work, and then their ideal level of those emotions. And these 10 measures that you'll see come out of a Copenhagen Business Institute research report. And so they're ones that are basically understood globally to be important for productivity and certain kinds of measures in the workplace. What I'm going to do with you today is actually hijack this survey. And so what I would like you to think about for the survey is that the current emotions is actually going to refer to how you felt in the spring. The expected emotions are going to refer to how you're feeling right now. And the ideal emotions will stay the ideal emotions. And what's going to happen as you do this survey, and I'll share the screen, the survey is going to populate with your data. And you're going to see a spider web graph like this that operates around those 10 values. So positive values on the left and the so-called negative values on the right. And we're going to see how people were feeling in the spring, right, in terms of these emotions, how people are feeling right now, and how they'd like to feel, right, what their ideal is for the workplace. The importance of this kind of thing is it allows us to interrogate what's going on, right? It allows us to enter into a dialogue with our companies to think about the effect of certain kinds of emotions overall and where interventions might need to be planned. So the link to that survey is right there. And again, I'm going to drop this into the chat. This should also work on your cell phone as a link into your cell phone browser. But if you want to use it on your computer, that might be easier as well. You'll see that the survey also has some demographic information that it asks for, just 2 points of demographics. Pretty straightforward. All of the results are completely anonymous. So go ahead and open up that link and then stick in your demographics and then your responses. You'll see that it's a bubble scale from 1 to 7. Remember that your current feelings are actually the spring, how you felt this spring in the middle of the pandemic uptick. Expected is what you're feeling right now, and ideal is what you would most like to feel.
The question about remote working, is that now or is that also for the spring?
That's sort of like right in this moment.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to leave this page up for a second, and then I'll go ahead and share the other one. which will show the results. Okay, I'm going to move over to the results page now, and this should update as people respond. I think this is probably going to take you about 5 minutes. No hurry. I'll just sit back, mute myself, and I'll let you work through this. So we'll give it maybe another minute for people to finish up. If you're still working on it, just keep on going. But we can already see there are some interesting kinds of values that are coming up, right? So obviously in an ideal situation, we don't want to feel anxious. We do want to feel valued. We don't want to feel mistreated. We would prefer to feel happy. Um, it's pretty interesting that the average, right, for the ideal is actually we want to feel a little bit stressed, right? We know that a little bit of a push, right, helps us be more productive. The question is, when does that push put us into a state where we're no longer productive, right? And your blue is up there into that zone where we would want to be thinking, wow, you are so far from your ideal, but you're also into that place where you're basically primed all the time to be reactive. And so when we think about emotional intelligence, right, this kind of spiderweb graph, this kind of survey gives us places to start asking questions, right? It gives us places to start being curious. So I'm going to let that run. And then what I'll do through Brooke is I'll share the full results with everybody. I see we've got 13 completed. We've got 19 people on the call. So we might be near full completion rate. I will share that out with you through Brooke, just so you can get a sense of what the report looks like and start thinking about those questions for yourself.
Peter, can you just describe what the key here is? The red is the ideal. I didn't catch the blue and
Oh,
the black.
okay. So the blue
Okay.
is the spring, the black is right now, and the pink or red is your ideal.
Okay.
Right. So we can see our pump up in the spring under stress and disorganized, right? And then black is now still quite stressed. Very interestingly, people don't feel very mistreated, which means to me that the organizations you're working in are valuing you well. And we can correlate that to your valued feeling where you're basically where you were in the spring, right? Obviously, you're never valued as much as you want, but you're pretty close, right? So if you think about wanting to be valued at a 6, right, and actually feeling valued around a 2, what the long-term impact or even the short-term impact of that would be on your work. Thank you, everybody, for digging into that with me. So I'm going to drop you back into the presentation screen. So one of the things that these kinds of tools give us is data, right? But the data they give us, while they're robust and interesting and validated and psychometrically in line and all the rest, is that they allow us to start asking questions so that we can understand what's going on. And this quote from Annette France is one of my favorite, right? You cannot transform something you don't know and understand. And if you don't know and understand the current state of the customer experience, how can you possibly design the desired future state? Well, you can substitute for customer experience anything you like: employee engagement, leadership efficacy, emotional culture. If you don't understand, how can you move it to where you need it to be? And so the idea of noticing, engaging with a problem, empowering a solution, right, is how we deal with emotions in the workplace. So I want to run you through another quick set of exercises. We'll just do one of these. And well, actually, so we're at 2:50. I want to get to the takeaways. So I'll just show these to you, and we can maybe have a chance to do this in another session. But if you think about someone that you're working well with, right, one of the things that happens is that it's easy to be productive with them, not because they're a nice person, right, but because the ways in which they're behaving are proven to be very effective, right? They respond effectively to feedback, they demonstrate awareness of you, right? They can have authentic dialogue with you, they can consider issues from multiple perspectives. When I run these with companies and with organizations and individuals, in general, when you're thinking of someone you've enjoyed working well with, these numbers out of 25, right, are usually in the 20 to 25 range, often 25s. Similarly, when you were talking about or thinking about someone you found it frustrating to work with, right, that it's draining to be around them, it's not easy to be productive at all, that person tends to be rated quite low. So we're usually talking about numbers below 10, right? So we've all had people like that in our work lives, people who just were so frustrating to work with that it was impossible, right? As well as people who are just fantastic, right? What we were working with there was not necessarily that they were bad co-employees, right? But that we found it difficult to manage the emotional interaction and the workplace interaction in a productive way. Now, that's not to say that someone you found frustrating to work with, you're going to get to a 25 on, like not a chance. They're frustrating to you for a reason. But is that frustration relevant to the way in which you're working is the question that emotional intelligence asks. So I have two short takeaway exercises that I'd like to share with you. The first is an emotional reasoning exercise, right? And this has to do with that habit formation loop that we were talking about before, right? The trigger, right, that leads to a reaction that gets to a reward. The emotional reasoning exercise, you remember, asks us to dive down into our emotion and our memory, right? It's kind of cool, actually, that the amygdala, which is that part of the brain that pumps out the stress hormones that gets us ready to fight or flight, that part of the brain is significantly involved in memory, right? Because it's how it helps us remember what's a threat. So we want to engage with our emotional memory, right? We want to think about what we're feeling, right? We want to think about actually whether that's the most accurate feeling, and we want to reason through our response to that. And I'll give you a scenario. You can probably think of one for yourselves in your own work lives, but a client that I was working with a couple weeks ago, she's a senior manager at a very large organization. Um, she had a 360 with me, emotional intelligence 360. We were debriefing on the results. She looked at the results from her manager and she said, I am so angry, right? I am angry that I'm hearing all of this for the first time. And so we had a moment to pause and think about that, right? We engaged with that idea of angry. And as she thought about how anger made her feel, right? And what she was feeling in that moment, she realized that she wasn't actually feeling angry, right? She dug a little bit deeper and she realized she was feeling frustrated and unvalued, right? And so in talking through this with her and setting up an action plan, what we realized was that she had a meeting with her manager for half an hour once a month, right? And that half an hour once a month, which is just not enough time, right? But that half an hour once a month was her devoting that time to her own working group. She never talked about what she needed. She never talked about her own development. She never talked about her own issues. She was always fronting the needs of her people. Now, of course, that's partly what good leaders do, right? But she didn't have that opportunity to engage with her manager on the kinds of things that came out in that 360 review. And so working back through that reasoning chain, right, we can then set up, a good response. And the good response is maybe for one of those monthly meetings to devote it to her, right, and not to her people, or to ask for an extra meeting every 2 or 3 months to talk about her and her relationship with her manager. If we stick in anger, right, we're in that limited, constrained feeling. We're powerless, right? We're beyond frustrated. We're into that sort of, oh, this is driving me absolutely nuts, right? We are not engaging our thinking brain. Once we start to emotionally reason through things, we're automatically pushing into our thinking brain, and our thinking brain is where we solve problems, right? And so we're able to reason through what we're feeling, right? We're able to think about whether there are better labels for this emotion that I'm feeling, right? Where am I feeling it is a great question to ask you. Is it in the pit of your stomach? Is it up in your lungs? Are you just like your fists clenched? What's going on with your body? And then also by noticing and engaging with emotions in this way, we can think about solutions for the emotion that is the problem. How relevant is my frustration to this situation? Well, for my client, it was hugely relevant. It was getting in the way of her relationship with her manager, which had a necessary impact on her relationship with her people. Another kind of exercise is to do a perspective shift, right? So like emotional reasoning, what we're doing with our perspective shift is noticing a pattern of behavior. And so another client is a senior manager at a computing firm, and that firm made a decision in the middle of the pandemic to take on a very large contract, but to significantly underbid it. And so the reason why they did that is they didn't want to lay anybody off, and they really wanted that contract. And so the underbid for this big long-term change management project led them into trouble, right? The team on the ground, who have been working with a local team to direct this change, have reported up to a direct report, and then that direct report reported up to the senior manager. And in their weekly meetings for the last maybe 3 months, my client told me this person basically said, this team's in trouble, right? You really need to intervene. There was no indication, right? Their KPIs were great. There was nothing coming up from the team itself. It was only this person reporting to my client. And so last week, she blew up, right? She said, she reported to me, what the hell am I supposed to do with this, right? You bring this up week after week after week, and you never ask for any input, any advice. What am I supposed to do with this information? And what we realized, and leading her through a perspective shift, is that her direct report was doing what she does for the CEOs. That is, signaling things that might become a problem. Not that were a problem, but that might become a problem. And so by engaging in a curiosity exercise, thinking about why someone is doing something, thinking about what patterns they're engaged in, we can develop a different response. And so the response that my client is going to make to her direct report in the next meeting is, don't tell me about this again until the situation changes. I received your message, right? That's really all that needs to happen as a different kind of response. Again, this response is directed through curiosity around a pattern of behavior by noticing your own emotions, by noticing the perspectives of other people. So these two ideas, right, both the emotional reasoning and the perspective shifting, lead to a kind of awareness of yourself and of other people that basically fall into the notice, engage, empower, right? What am I feeling? So what? How relevant is it to what's going on right now? If it's relevant, what should I do? Right? Notice, engage, empower. We're looking for patterns, right, in ourselves and in others. We're curious about them, and we're looking for solutions. If we had time, we'd shift perspectives onto ourselves, right? You might want to think about how well you exhibit those behaviors that we were going to look at with other people. But in the end, right, our essential ideas fall into decelerate, right? Pause, think about what's going on, evaluate how you're feeling, how other people are feeling, what effect those emotions are having, and then develop a response that's appropriate to the decision that has to be made. This quote from Mike Tyson that's on the left is one of my favorites, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? What we need to do as EI practitioners, right, people who are aware of our emotional intelligence, is to be thinking and practicing things like perspective shifting and practicing things like emotional reasoning outside of real time, so that when we're in that moment, we have a couple of tools we can deploy. So I hope that's useful to you. Stop the share. I can make available the slide deck and the report, and you can work through those on your own time if you'd like as well. I'll turn it back over to Brooke and see if there are any questions. Again, happy to deal with things on email as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Good things to be thinking about. And back to my comment in the beginning, it all seems supercharged right now and over the last 6 to 8 months already. So thank you. Certainly, if anyone has any questions, feel free to chat them in, and we will have our next join each other the next 2 weeks on Thursday at 2:00. If you did register for this session, you were able to click which ones you want to join to. I will send the reminder to everyone. If you decide and are able to join us, feel free, and the login will be in that reminder for next Thursday as well. Again, as Peter said, if you had any thoughts or questions or need for clarification on any of this, feel free to reach out to him or send your questions to me. And as Peter said, the sessions serve independently, but we'll build on each other. So I'm excited to see what we've talked about today will move forward throughout our mini session. So thank you, Peter,
Yeah,
and
my pleasure.
thank you all for joining us. And we hope you'll have a good afternoon. And I'll send out this recording as well if you want to review anything or share with colleagues, and certainly share the registration with others as well. They didn't need to attend today in order to join us in the future. So send that along to them. The registration's at slcchamber.org, or you can get there at visit stlc.com/SLLI as well. All right. Thank you all and have a
Cool.
great afternoon.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I hope to keep the conversation going. Brooke, I'll go ahead and email that to you, the slide deck right now.
Okay.
And then I'll drop that report as well. Actually, I'm dropping into another meeting, so
Okay.
it might not be right now, but it'll be today.
That's fine. Yeah, I won't get it out until tomorrow or Monday.
Okay.
So very good. Okay. And I think you have to stop the recording because you're still technically the host, or we can just
Okay,
get
there
out
we
of here too.
go.